Before the Enterprise became the most famous name in Starfleet history, humanity's future among the stars was anything but certain. In the year 2151, Earth launched the NX-01 Enterprise, a revolutionary vessel powered by humanity's first Warp 5 engine. Under the command of Captain Jonathan Archer, the ship would embark on missions that helped shape the future of the Alpha Quadrant, and lay the foundations for what would eventually become the United Federation of Planets. For many fans, that's where the story of Starfleet truly begins. But Enterprise was never alone. While Archer and his crew explored strange new worlds and made first contact with countless alien civilizations, other starships quietly carried out the less glamorous work of defending Earth, and protecting colonies and maintaining humanity's growing presence among the stars. Among those vessels was one of the era's most unusual ships, a starship that appeared only briefly throughout Star Trek Enterprise, yet one that represents a crucial missing link in Starfleet's evolution. This was the 22nd century Intrepid-type cruiser. We recently spoke about the Intrepid-type in our Enterprise era ships video, and many of you really enjoyed it, so let's take a deeper dive into this vessel. If you enjoy these videos, hit that subscribe button to never miss a Star Trek video. Oh, and you can also support us on Patreon and get a free Trek Central pin. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the history of this forgotten vessel. From its origins within the United Earth Starfleet, to its appearances during the Xindi Crisis, its role in Earth's growing fleet, and its surprising post-war legacy, and the ship that would eventually be commanded by none other than Malcolm Reed himself. This is the story of the Intrepid-type. While we're talking about Star Trek starships, now is a great time to tell you about our partner website, the Cargo Bay. If you're looking for Star Trek action figures, house mats, or even Klingon keyboards for your PC, this is the place to go. The Cargo Bay has an exciting range of sci-fi collectibles, including these new spaceport mugs, which come in a range of colours, ready to ship right away. Head over to the link in the video description and make it so. Okay, let's talk about the NX refit class. When most Star Trek fans think about the early days of Starfleet, one ship immediately comes to mind: Enterprise NX-01. And that's completely understandable. The NX-01 was humanity's first Warp 5 capable vessel. It was the flagship of Earth's exploratory efforts, and ultimately one of the most important starships in Federation history. However, there was one major problem. A growing interstellar civilization cannot survive with just one ship. By the early 2150s, Earth had already maintained colonies beyond the Sol system. Settlements such as Alpha Centauri, Terra Nova, and Vega required supplies, communication, and protection. Trade routes were also expanding. Scientific missions were becoming increasingly common. Starfleet was beginning to establish a permanent presence beyond Earth's home system. At the same time, the galaxy was proving itself to be a dangerous place. Humanity had already encountered hostiles like Klingons, Suliban agents, Orion pirates, and numerous other threats. As Earth's influence expanded, so too did the need for vessels capable of protecting that growing sphere. The NX class was designed for exploration, and typically would be far away from Earth. But Starfleet also needed ships capable of carrying out everyday duties. Like I said, escort missions, defensive patrols, colony support operations, search and rescue, and that is why vessels like the Intrepid-type entered service. Unlike Enterprise, which represented the absolute cutting edge of human technology, the Intrepid-type appears to have been conceived as a practical and dependable fleet vessel. It lacked the prestige and revolutionary tech of the NX program, but it did offer flexibility instead. These starships could patrol Earth's colonies, protect shipping lanes, respond to emergencies, and most importantly, defend humanity while Enterprise ventured into the unknown. In many ways, ships like the Intrepid-type were the true backbone of the early Starfleet, because while Enterprise was busy making history, someone still had to protect humanity's home. What makes the Intrepid particularly fascinating is that it represents a transitional period in Starfleet history. I mean, if you look at the vessel, you can immediately recognize familiar design elements that would later become staples of Federation starship construction. The Intrepid-type may not have possessed the capabilities of the NX-01, but it did help establish the visual and technological foundations that would influence Starfleet design for centuries to come. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the ship's unique appearance. It's a design unlike any other vessel in Star Trek history around this specific era. One of the first things people notice about the Intrepid-type is its appearance. Even among Starfleet vessels, the ship does look a little bit unusual. The most striking feature is undoubtedly the half-saucer configuration. Instead of a traditional circular primary hull, which became common with Federation vessels, the front section appears to have been cut away entirely, creating one of the most distinctive silhouettes in all of Star Trek. It is a design choice that immediately raises questions. Why would Starfleet build a ship that looks like this? As it turns out, the answer begins not in the 22nd century, but in the behind the scenes during the production of Star Trek Enterprise. When the second season finale, The Expanse, entered production, the visual effects team faced a unique challenge. The episode did require a small fleet of Earth vessels to arrive and assist Enterprise during its confrontation with a Jurassic Klingon bird of prey. Normally, this would have been simple. In the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, or even Voyager, the production team could simply reuse an existing Federation ship model, like the Miranda class or Excelsior class. But Enterprise was different. The entire setting of the series was that the NX-01 was Earth's first true deep space starship. This meant there was no existing 22nd century fleet vessels available for the effects team to use. They had to create them from scratch. To solve this problem, veteran Star Trek illustrator John Eaves was tasked with designing several entirely new Earth starships. The brief was simple: create vessels that clearly belonged to the same era as Enterprise, but which wouldn't be mistaken for the NX-01 itself. According to Eaves, he deliberately approached these ships differently than Enterprise. Rather than designing exploration vessels, he imagined ships whose primary purpose was defending Earth. He looked to modern military aircraft for inspiration, creating compact, aggressive silhouettes that felt more like combat vessels than scientific explorers. One of his most unusual ideas was the concept of cutting the saucer section in half. This result immediately stood out. The shortened hull gave the vessel a more compact and maneuverable appearance, while also making it visually distinct from Archer's ship. Eaves would go on to explain that he wanted the vessel to resemble a predator. In fact, part of that inspiration did come from sharks. Specifically, the way a shark's dorsal fins appear when preparing to attack. Those small fins extending from the nacelles weren't just decorative details. They were intended to reinforce the vessel's aggressive posture. The design proved so popular with the producers that it was selected almost immediately. What began as a quick concept sketch soon evolved into one of the most recognizable background ships in Star Trek Enterprise. Yet despite being created largely as a supporting vessel, the Intrepid-type would go on to become one of the most beloved ships of the Enterprise era. And once you look beyond its unusual appearance, it becomes clear why. Because beneath the distinctive silhouette was a surprisingly capable vessel. While the Intrepid-type is often overshadowed by the more famous NX class, a closer examination reveals that the vessel was surprisingly capable for its time. At approximately 165 meters in length, the Intrepid-type was significantly smaller than the Enterprise NX-01, which measured just over 225 meters. The vessel operated with a crew complement of only 46 personnel, spread across 7 decks, designated from Deck A through Deck G. By Starfleet standards, this was a remarkably compact ship, yet size isn't everything. The Intrepid-type appears to have been designed with efficiency in mind. Every aspect of the vessel reflects a practical philosophy. Unlike Enterprise, which carried extensive scientific facilities and accommodations for long-duration exploratory missions, the Intrepid was built to perform its duties with a much smaller crew and fewer resources. The ship's primary hull is perhaps its most distinctive feature. The unusual half-saucer section housed many of the vessel's command and operational facilities, while maintaining a lower profile than traditional Starfleet designs. At the front of the cutaway section sat the navigational deflector, one of the most important systems aboard any warp-capable vessel. Nearby sensor pallets provided navigational and tactical information, allowing the ship to operate effectively both within and beyond the Sol system. Moving aft, the vessel featured a compact engineering section, positioned between the primary hull and warp nacelles. Managed atop this structure was also the warp field governor. This was a crucial component that regulated the vessel's warp field and ensured stable fast and light travel. Now, the nacelles themselves differed noticeably from those found on the NX class. They were shorter and more compact, featuring distinctive stabilizing fins mounted along their outer edges. Combine that with the ship's aggressive silhouette, these features gave the Intrepid-type a much more militaristic appearance than its exploration-focused cousin. Powering the vessel was a warp drive capable of reaching warp 3.5. While this was considerably slower than a Warp 5 engine aboard Enterprise, it was more than adequate for defensive patrols, escort duties, or operations throughout Earth's expanding sphere of influence. In many ways, the Intrepid represented a balance between capability and practicality. It wasn't the fastest ship, it wasn't the largest ship, and it certainly wasn't the most advanced, but it was reliable. And reliability was exactly what Starfleet needed. When it came to the armament, the Intrepid-type was more heavily equipped than many people might expect. The vessel carried phased cannons as its primary energy weapon. This was the same technology used aboard Enterprise for a time. These weapons provided the ship with a respectable defense capability against contemporary threats. Supplementing these were 2 torpedo launchers, giving the vessel additional firepower during fleet engagements or defensive operations. Protection came from the hull polarization system. This was a defensive technology commonly used by Earth vessels before the widespread adoption of energy shields in later years. While primitive compared with later Federation deflector systems, hull polarization could significantly strengthen a vessel's structural integrity during combat. Taken together, these systems suggest a vessel that was designed with defense firmly in mind. This was not a ship built to spend years exploring the unknown reaches of the galaxy. It was a starship built to defend colonies, protect convoys, escort diplomats, and if necessary, fight. In fact, when compared directly with Enterprise NX-01, the differences between the 2 vessels reveal something fascinating about Starfleet's priorities during this period. Enterprise represented the future, but the Intrepid represented the present. One ship pushed boundaries, the other protected everything humanity had already built, and nowhere would that role become more apparent than during the Xindi crisis. For all the attention the Intrepid-type cruiser actually receives, its on-screen career was surprisingly brief. The vessel's most significant appearance came in the Enterprise Season 2 finale, The Expanse. At this point in the series, Earth had suffered one of the darkest moments in its own history. The Xindi probe attack had carved a devastating trench across Florida, Venezuela, and the Caribbean, killing millions and leaving the planet reeling from shock. Enterprise was immediately recalled to Earth. However, Captain Archer's return journey would not be peaceful. Waiting for him was an old enemy, the Klingon known as Duras. Still obsessed with capturing Archer and restoring his family honor, the Klingon commander intercepted Enterprise near Earth with his bird of prey. Now the NX-01 was already damaged, exhausted, and in no condition for another major battle. For a moment, it appeared Archer's mission might end before it even begun. Then, help arrived. Emerging from Earth's space was a small task force of Starfleet vessels. Among them was the Intrepid, commanded by Captain Carlos Ramirez. Accompanying the vessel were Warp Delta-class ships, forming a defensive squadron tasked with protecting the Sol system. After the recent Xindi attack, all these ships were on high alert. Together, Earth ships opened fire on the bird of prey. Although none of the vessels individually matched the Klingon ship in capability, their combined firepower was enough to force a retreat. For perhaps the first time in Star Trek history, viewers saw evidence that Earth possessed something more than a single starship. The appearance only lasted a few moments, yet it carried significant implications. The existence of ships like the Intrepid demonstrated that Starfleet had begun moving beyond the experimental phase represented by Enterprise. Humanity was no longer relying on one vessel to carry its ambitions into space. It was beginning to build the foundations of a true interstellar navy. Captain Ramirez stood at the forefront of that effort. Although little is known about Ramirez himself, his command of the Intrepid does suggest he was entrusted one of the most important assignments in Earth's Starfleet. He was also mentioned a few times in passing throughout the Star Trek Enterprise series. Now, while Archer ventured into the Delphic Expanse to prevent Earth's destruction, Ramirez and crews like his remained behind, protecting everything Archer was fighting to save. And while the Intrepid's role during the Xindi crisis may have been brief, an alternate future would reveal just how dangerous that responsibility could actually become. For most of its history, the Intrepid-type operated in the background of Star Trek's narrative. You could sometimes see it in the background of certain episodes, like in Season 4, Stormfront Part 2. But one of the ship's most memorable moments comes in a future that was never meant to happen. The Enterprise episode, Twilight, remains one of the series' most fascinating alternate timeline stories. After Captain Archer is exposed to a parasitic anomaly that destroys his ability to form long-term memories, Enterprise's mission into the Delphic Expanse fails drastically. Without Captain Archer's leadership, the Xindi weapon would never have been stopped. Earth is destroyed, billions perish, and human civilization is virtually wiped out. Only a few thousand survivors actually remain. Many years later, humanity has become a refugee species. The remnants of Earth's population have fled to Ceti Alpha 5, where a small colony struggles to survive among the ruins of everything humanity once built. And orbiting above the colony are the last surviving ships of Starfleet. Among them is the Intrepid. It's a haunting image, just a handful of battered Starfleet starships standing watch over the final remnants of the human race. In many ways, it does perfectly represent what the Intrepid-type was designed to do: protect, defend, and endure, even at the end of civilization itself. According to Captain T'Pol, who was retired by this point, the surviving fleet routinely patrolled nearby systems, searching for any indication of Xindi activity. Their crews knew they could never truly defeat the Xindi, but they continued their mission regardless. They were all that remained. Eventually, the fragile existence did get discovered and come under attack. A Xindi task force located the colony and launched a devastating assault. The surviving Earth ships moved to intercept. The battle was hopeless from the beginning. Outnumbered and outgunned, Starfleet's remaining vessels fought desperately to protect the colony below. During the engagement, the Intrepid-type suffered catastrophic damage. One of the vessel's nacelles was destroyed, shearing it completely off and leaving the ship crippled. Despite the damage, the vessel was still able to make it back to the colony. Barely. For a ship that had only appeared briefly elsewhere in the series, it was an incredible memorable moment. Not only because of the visual impact of seeing the vessel torn apart, but because it demonstrated the courage of a crew serving aboard the lesser known ship. These weren't the heroes history would remember, they weren't commanding Enterprise. Yet when humanity faced extinction, they stood their ground anyway. Fortunately for everybody involved, the timeline was ultimately erased when Archer's memories were restored, and the events leading to Earth's destruction were prevented. The colony vanished, and that battle never happened. But the episode did offer Star Trek fans a rare glimpse of what Starfleet's forgotten ships might have looked like under the most desperate circumstances imaginable. It also reinforced something important about the Intrepid-type design. When everything was on the line, ships like the Intrepid were still there, still fighting. And according to later sources, the class's story was far from over. Because following the Xindi crisis and the eventual Earth-Romulan War, the Intrepid-type would undergo its greatest transformation yet. One of the biggest frustrations surrounding the Intrepid-type is that Star Trek Enterprise ended before we got to see the Earth-Romulan War. And yes, you do hear me repeating this all the time because I love this topic. Now for years, people did wonder what role ships like the NX class and the Intrepid-type might have played during one of the most important conflicts in humanity's history. While the television series never answered those questions, several licensed Star Trek novels and reference works did attempt to fill in the gaps. It is important to remember that everything we're about to discuss does fall into the realms of beta canon, extended Star Trek canon, whatever you want to refer to it as. These events are not part of official on-screen continuity, but they're still super cool to discuss. And according to these sources, the Earth-Romulan War did force Starfleet to completely rethink its own fleet structure. The conflict did demand a large number of vessels, which were produced quickly and efficiently. That created a problem. While ships such as the NX class and Intrepid-type were highly capable, they are also relatively expensive and time-consuming to build. Instead, Starfleet increasingly shifted its focus towards a new design, rather updating an old design. This was the Daedalus class. Of course, you may know this, we've discussed it recently, but it's got its distinctive spherical primary hull and modular construction philosophy. It was reported that the Daedalus could be produced far more efficiently than either the NX or Intrepid class. For every NX class, there could be 3 Daedaluses made. For every Intrepid class, there could be 2 Daedaluses made. As a result, production of the Intrepid-type began to slow, while the NX class was stopped completely. But this wasn't the end of the Intrepid, far from it. Following the war, and the founding of the United Federation of Planets in 2161, a major fleet modernization program was launched. Under this initiative, existing Intrepid-type vessels underwent extensive upgrades. Warp propulsion systems were improved dramatically. New engine cores increased performance and reliability. Defensive systems received major enhancements. Most significantly, the class reportedly gained true deflector shield technology, replacing the older hull polarization systems that had protected Earth vessels throughout the NX era. Tractor beams were also introduced, finally bringing the class closer to the Starfleet vessels fans would recognize from later centuries. In many ways, these upgraded Intrepid-class ships became transitional vessels. They were no longer purely Earth starships, but they weren't fully Federation designs either. And one vessel in particular would become the most famous example of that evolution, the USS Pioneer. A ship whose commanding officer was already very familiar to perhaps many Star Trek Enterprise fans, Captain Malcolm Reed. For many Enterprise fans, this may be the most interesting chapter in the Intrepid-type's entire history. Because after years of serving as Enterprise's armory officer and tactical specialist, Malcolm Reed finally received something many viewers felt he had earned long ago: his own command. Following the Earth-Romulan War and the founding of the United Federation of Planets, Reed was promoted to captain and assigned to command the USS Pioneer, NCC 63. Unlike the Intrepid-type vessels seen during the days of the Enterprise NX-01, Pioneer represented the modernized evolution of the class. It was refitted with upgraded technology and adapted for service within the fledgling Federation Starfleet. The vessel became one of the most important ships of this new generation. For Captain Reed, the assignment represented an entirely new challenge. Throughout his tenure at Enterprise, he had proven himself to be an exceptional tactical officer. He was well disciplined, methodical, and fiercely loyal. But commanding a starship required an entirely different skill set. Now, he wasn't simply responsible for a ship's weapon systems, or the security. He wasn't even responsible for just a single department. He was responsible for everyone. Everything that happened aboard Pioneer, and with its crew, ultimately rested on his shoulders. And thankfully for Reed, he wasn't alone. Serving alongside him was a familiar face: Travis Mayweather. The former helmsman of Enterprise NX-01 became Pioneer's first officer, reuniting two veterans of Archer's historic mission. Together, they represented some of the most experienced officers in the entire Federation Starfleet. The assignment also placed Pioneer at the forefront of a rapidly changing galaxy. The Federation was still in its early infancy. Its member worlds were learning how to work together. Technologies developed by humans, Vulcans, Andorians, and Tellarites were being integrated for the very first time. And Pioneer often serves as a testing ground for that new future. One notable member of the crew was Tobin Dax. Yes, that Dax. Long before Curzon Dax, Jadzia Dax, or even Ezri Dax, the symbiont served aboard Pioneer during this era, contributing to advances in warp propulsion and helping shape Starfleet's technological future. It is one of those wonderful connections that links Enterprise-era storytelling directly to the 24th century. Over the course of its service, Pioneer undertook a variety of missions that reflected the Federation's changing priorities. No longer focused purely on survival, Starfleet was beginning to embrace diplomacy, scientific exploration, and peaceful expansion on brand new levels. The Pioneer, under Captain Reed, participated in negotiations with emerging powers, carried out exploratory assignments, and helped strengthen relations between worlds that would eventually become key Federation partners. Yet despite these peaceful ambitions, the galaxy did remain dangerous. On multiple occasions, Pioneer found itself confronting threats that tested both Reed's leadership and the capabilities of Intrepid-class design. One particularly unusual mission involved a mysterious were species. Fans of Enterprise may remember the Were as the automated ship repair station encountered during Archer's travels. Originally intended to assist passing vessels, these mysterious facilities were rather dangerous. When a crisis involving the Were emerged, Pioneer found itself at the centre of events, once again proving the continued value of the Intrepid-type in an era increasingly dominated by newer designs. Throughout these assignments, Reed gradually evolved from a somewhat reserved tactical officer people remember from Enterprise into a capable and respected Starship commander. In many ways, commanding Pioneer did complete his character arc. Back aboard Enterprise NX-01, Reed often struggled with interpersonal relationships. He could be rigid, intensely professional, and occasionally uncomfortable in social situations. Command forced him to grow, to become not merely a specialist but a leader, and by all accounts, he succeeded. Eventually, Reed's performance and command ability attracted the attention of one of the most important figures in Federation history, Admiral Jonathan Archer. Following his service aboard Pioneer, Reed was promoted once again, becoming assistant to Admiral Archer himself. It was a fitting conclusion. The two officers who had helped launch humanity's journey into deep space now found themselves helping guide the Federation through its earliest years. Meanwhile, command of the Intrepid-type Pioneer passed to another notable officer, Captain Caroline Paris. As a member of the famous Paris family, her service aboard the vessel helped establish a legacy that would eventually stretch all the way to Tom Paris and the crew of Voyager nearly 2 centuries later. Of course, the Pioneer would never achieve the fame of Enterprise. It would never become a household name across the Federation. But in many ways, that's what makes the story so compelling. Because while Enterprise explored the frontier, Pioneer helped build a future that made that frontier possible. For many years, the Intrepid-type did remain one of those ships the fans quietly admired from afar. Like we've been over, it did briefly appear in Star Trek Enterprise, but it also got an Eagle Moss model, featured in a handful of reference books and novels, and that was about it. But in 2026, very recently, that changed. To celebrate both the 25th anniversary of Star Trek Enterprise and the 16th anniversary of the MMO video game Star Trek Online, the developers, Cryptic Studios, released a 16th anniversary Enterprise bundle. Rather than focusing on the familiar NX-01, the developers chose to celebrate the wider fleet of the Enterprise era, giving several previously obscure Earth vessels fully playable modern interpretations. As some had been available before, but these updated them and brought them for a new lease of life. Among them was the Intrepid-type. It was reimagined as the United Earth NV-class multi-mission temporal cruiser. The ship retained the unmistakable silhouette of the original Enterprise-era design, while expanding into a fully fledged Tier 6 starship for Star Trek Online players. If you get this ship in-game, you can customize it with multiple visual options, including a striking Lost Era-inspired skin that does imagine how the Intrepid design language might have evolved during the decades between Captain Archer's adventures and Captain Kirk's 5-year mission. It could even deploy Enterprise-era shuttle pods as hangar pets, further tying the vessel back to its 22nd century roots. For longtime Enterprise fans, like myself, this was a fantastic moment. It's still available in-game now, so you can go get it, and I recommend it. After more than 20 years, a ship that only existed for about a few seconds on screen has finally become a hero ship in its own right. It's a fitting tribute to one of Star Trek's most overlooked designs. It is perhaps proof that the Intrepid-type was never quite as forgotten as we once believed. Despite becoming a favourite among dedicated Star Trek fans, the Intrepid-type was never intended to be a major starship. In fact, its creation was largely driven by necessity. As we discussed earlier, when the production team began work on the Expanse episode, they did need several Earth vessels capable of arriving dramatically and assisting Enterprise during its confrontation with the Klingons. The problem was kinda simple. Enterprise existed in a period of Star Trek history that had barely been explored before. No background ships sitting in a digital archive waiting to be deployed. Everything had to be built from scratch, and it had to look believable for that era. The producers turned to veteran Star Trek illustrator John Eaves, who had already contributed countless designs across multiple series and Star Trek films. Eaves was given a deceptively difficult task: create ships that felt related to Enterprise NX-01, but make sure audiences couldn't mistake them for Enterprise itself. The solution was to lean heavily into a military aesthetic. Unlike Enterprise, which was designed as a scientific exploration vessel, Eaves imagined these ships as defenders, protectors of Earth, ships that would have spent their careers patrolling human space rather than venturing into the unknown. To achieve this, he drew inspiration from military aircraft, particularly their compact and aggressive silhouettes. He wanted these vessels to look fast, dangerous, and purpose-built. One of the most radical concepts involved cutting away a large section of a saucer. The result was the distinctive half-saucer design that would eventually become the Intrepid-type. According to Eaves, the vessel's posture was inspired in part by sharks preparing to attack. The small fins mounted near the nacelles were deliberately intended to evoke the appearance of a predator. It is a slight small detail, but once you know it, it is impossible to unsee. The design was immediately popular with the production team. Soon afterwards, visual effects artists Pierre Droulet and Rob Bonchoon transformed the concept artwork into a fully realised CGI vessel. To save time and budget, elements of the existing NX-1 model were incorporated into the design. This not only reduced production costs, but also helped reinforce the visual relationship between the two ship classes. The result was a vessel that did look unmistakably human, a ship that clearly belonged to the same technological family as Enterprise, yet one that maintained its own identity. Ironically, despite being created as a background ship, the Intrepid-type has gone on to become one of the most recognisable Earth vessels from the Enterprise era. More than 2 decades later, fans are still discussing this starship. They're still building models of it, and are still wondering what other adventures the Intrepid might have gone on, beyond being on the edge of the screen. For a starship that did only appear briefly throughout Star Trek Enterprise, the Intrepid-type has left a remarkable legacy. It wasn't the fastest vessel of this era, nor the most advanced, and it certainly wasn't the most famous. Yet the Intrepid-type represents something incredibly important in Starfleet history. It sits between the early warp ships that carried humanity beyond Earth, and the Great Federation starships that would soon follow. While Enterprise NX-01 pushed the boundaries of exploration, ships like the Intrepid defended the worlds humanity had already settled. As mentioned, they protected the colonies, they escorted the convoys, and patrolled the final frontier. They also ensured that Earth's growing interstellar presence could survive long enough to become something greater. The class would continue serving throughout the Earth-Romulan War, the modernization program, and the birth of the Federation itself. As we discuss, the most famous descendant, the US's Pioneer, would carry officers like Malcolm Reed, Travis Mayweather, and Tobin Dax into a new era of galactic history. That's not bad for a ship that was originally designed to just sit in the background. The Intrepid-type may never have achieved the legendary status of the NX-01 Enterprise, but perhaps that's exactly what makes it so fascinating, because hidden behind Starfleet's greatest heroes are countless other ships and crews whose stories are rarely told. And among those forgotten vessels, few are as intriguing as the Intrepid-type, the ship that helped protect humanity's future long before the Federation even existed. So what do you think of the Intrepid-type cruiser? Would you have liked to see more of Earth's early fleet during Star Trek Enterprise? Let us know down below. And if you did enjoy this deep dive into one of Star Trek's forgotten starships, be sure to subscribe to Trek Central for more Star Trek lore, history, and starship breakdowns. Thank you to everyone who has supported us on Patreon. Your support helps us keep making these Galaxy class videos. Until next time, live long and prosper, my friends. Goodbye.